Was it a flyer? Was it an email?
Emails.
Email. Facebook? Website? Word
Email.
of mouth?
Email.
An email. The radio? How did you hear?
Flyer.
Flyers.
Should know.
Okay, flyers and emails were, okay, great. Well, thank you for coming. I have my phone in my hand to remind you to turn yours off, or at least the ringer off, to remind me to remind you. I'm really pleased to have these two speakers with us tonight. I met Larry Kleiman, I don't know if he remembers this, on an airplane. About 35 years ago, we were sitting next to each other.
What?
You don't remember?
No, I don't.
I do.
Well,
I think it was the first time I heard about Cocoon. In any case, we've known each other for a long time, but I've never met Abel before, and I'm very happy to meet him tonight. Larry co-founded the Willamette Valley Immigration Project, and that was 35 years ago. So it must have been a little less than 35
Yeah, I
years
was
ago
gonna
on
say.
the airplane. And he was also co-founder of Cocoon, which is the Oregon Farm Workers Union. He's been their secretary-treasurer now since 1988. He's an accredited representative of Centro de Servicios para Campesinos, which means he's authorized to provide legal representation before the immigrant court, Immigration and Customs Informant, and the Customs and Immigration Services. So you might have guessed by now he's really a lawyer too.
play one on TV.
The National Lawyers Guild National Immigration Project selected Larry as its 2005 Carol Weiss King Award recipient, honoring his many years of defending immigrants and their interests. From '99 to 2002, he was on the board of the Social Justice Fund Northwest and board chair for the last 2 years he was there. And he's rejoined the board 5 years ago. He's the board treasurer of the Sheridan Foundation, founding board chair of the Northwest Workers Justice Project in Portland. Originally from Chicago, he went to school at Oberlin. And Abel is from Mexico. Abel Valadares, is that right? And he took up a role in the Oregon Immigrants' Rights Movement in the spring of 2006. He was still in high school then. So he is, it's really great when we get young activists, get them hooked. And he co-led a walkout by more than 1,000 students to protest the anti-immigration laws. And he went on to work as Cocoon's field organizer and a coordinator of Capaces Collaborative, which he's going to talk about tonight, so I'm not going to explain it. He's also co-led a donor fundraising campaign to establish Capaces Leadership Institute, and he was one of the Institute's inaugural staff. He was named to the board of the Social Justice Fund Northwest a couple of years ago, and he comes from Querétaro, Mexico. Really very happy to have you both here tonight.
Well, thanks, Sandy. Good evening to you all. We wanted to lay this out for you and what we want to offer. And I know Abel will be shocked to hear this because he usually expects me to say in 3 parts, but we're actually going to do it in 4 parts tonight. The first part is called Y por eso estamos como estamos. There's a famous quote, one of our founding leaders of Cocoon that I'll explain in a few minutes. Basically what it encapsulates is why things are the way they are. Por eso estamos como estamos. That's why we are the way we are. Which is another way of saying, how did it get so bad? And why hasn't it changed? The second part, I want to talk a little bit about what we and others, especially the United Farm Workers before us, have done about that. Abel then is going to talk about what it's like to be out there organizing, in some recent experiences that he's had. And then lastly, we want to talk about the broader movement that PECUN leads, or co-leads. PECUN is a fairly unusual kind of union, and maybe by the end of the evening you'll have a sense of why and how. Now, there's a lot of history in 35 years, and we don't have enough time to describe it all, and you don't have enough interest to hear it all. So, what I brought with me this evening for you to take with you are 5 documents. They're all short, and they highlight different parts of background that we're going to talk about, and I'll mention them sort of as we go along and hand them out to you for you to take with you. So, part 1, por eso estamos como estamos. That's why we are the way we are. And I want to start by asking you a question, which is, what comes to your mind when you think of the word farm workers? Anything.
It's hard work.
Hard work. What else?
Poverty.
Poverty.
Exploitation.
Thank you. Other reactions? Who do you picture when you think of farm workers?
Mexicans.
Mexicans, right?
Families?
Families. You
Brown-faced short people.
say again?
Brown-faced short people.
People that are brown skinned.
People have migrated.
People from another country or another area. These are all very relevant issues, or very relevant images, I should say. And since we talk a lot these days about the 1% and the 99%, one thing we notice about farm workers is in the working class, they're the 1%, except they're the 1% at the bottom and not at the top. They're the country's lowest paid workers. And they're with probably the exception, or along with domestic workers, they have the fewest legal rights of any group of workers in this country. And this is not a new thing. And it's not even something that originated when the workforce was mostly Latino, mostly immigrant, mostly Mexican. It's actually something that was one of the big failures of the New Deal. And that's where I want to start the context about por eso estamos como estamos. In 1935, as I'm sure a number of you know, the Congress passed the Wagner Act. It regularized or regulated collective bargaining. There was great labor upheaval in the 30s. Business was complaining that they couldn't go on like this, and something needed to be done to create legal channels for unionization. And that's exactly what the Wagner Act did, the National Labor Relations Act. It created procedures and said if unions follow these procedures, or workers do, then employers need to recognize and bargain with those unions. Now, there were some workers excluded from the National Labor Relations Act. Public workers, domestic workers, and farm workers. Now, farm workers, so we're talking about 1935, this is what, 77 years ago. Farm workers at the time weren't Mexican, they weren't immigrants, and they weren't generally in the West. And the reason why farm workers were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act is because the Congress at the time, though I did a little research on this to actually find out what the numbers were, the makeup of the Senate in 1935, when they voted on this law, was 75 Democrats and 21 Republicans. Of course, there were only 48 states, that's why it doesn't add up to 100. In the House, 332 Democrats and 103 Republicans. So the so-called supermajority idea, they didn't have any problem with the filibuster, except for one thing, which was that in the House, 107 of those Democrats were from the South. And their concern about the National Labor Relations Act and farm workers was that African Americans, the children and grandchildren of former slaves, who now were farm workers and dominated the agricultural industry in the South, would suddenly have the right to unionize. And so they made it known to the president that you're not getting your National Labor Relations Act if farm workers are included. So today, that exclusion, which still stands, in the National Labor Relations Act is a vestige of Jim Crow. It's not something that was proposed when Cesar Chavez started organizing the United Farm Workers Union 50 years ago next month. So that's one piece of history about por eso estamos como estamos, how we came to be, how we are. State laws were passed that mimicked that law. So all but 3 or 4 states in the country offer no state collective bargaining rights for farm workers either, and Oregon is one of those states. California, of course, does have a collective bargaining law, and it has some of the same problems that the national collective bargaining law has, which is poor enforcement. The things we've struggled for in Oregon since we started organizing originally in 1977, forming the union in 1985, making sure that farm workers are paid the minimum wage. The growers have tried many times to exclude farm workers from the minimum wage or freeze the increases. We've fought all those back. And in 2004, not until 2004, did farm workers get the right to take a paid break at work. 10 minutes in any 4-hour period. And Oregon is only the 5th state in the country to allow paid breaks or to require paid breaks for farm workers. So that's just a little bit of a sketch. And one of the documents that you can take with you describes, in very simple terms, one column describes what it is like to work without a union contract, and the other column, what it's like to work with a union contract. What are some of the guarantees of a union contract? And these, of course, don't only apply to farm workers, but for example. The other side of this handout describes the step-by-step process of getting from organizing to a union contract. Of course, many of these provisions don't apply to farm workers because they aren't. For example, farm workers can have 100% agreement on their in their farm and go to the employer and say, we want you to recognize our union, and the employer has absolutely no obligation to do so because farm workers aren't covered by collective bargaining laws. So another document in here that you'll be able to look at is called The Road to Institutional Change in Farm Worker Rights. And this lays out a series of milestones starting in 1988 and up through 2004 in a struggle that we waged for collective bargaining rights and the like, involving field organizing, litigation, boycott, lobbying, drafting legislation, and it ends with a list that I call the 7 hell no's. And it's a testament to some of the progress we've made, at least politically, in this state through this struggle. We waged a 10-year boycott against NORPAC. NORPAC is a grower-owned processor, has 5 plants in the valley. It's the 11th largest food processor in the country. And we boycotted them for 10 years and brought them to the bargaining table about collective bargaining in 2002. So the 7 hell no's, what were they? Number 1 was, and by the way, these weren't just no's, these were hell no's. Hell no, no way ever are we going to accept this. The first one was no to unionization. Now, a lot of growers still oppose unionization, but the idea that they would never talk about it is out the window. They sat down across the bargaining table from us, and I personally was there, so I know como estamos in this regard, and we were talking about unionization. No to recognizing or communicating with PECUN. For the first number of years of our history, they wouldn't talk to us, they wouldn't be seen with us, they would get upset if we were in the same committee that they were, and in 2003, when these negotiations happened, they went to the governor and said, we need PECUN at the table because of the power that we had been able to harness, principally with consumers and with farm workers. Number 3, hell no to a collective bargaining law covering farm workers. They themselves demanded a law be passed. Now the question was, what kind of law? And as Cantinflas used to say, ahí está el detalle, the devil's in the details. The next hell no was, we will never accept a law that allows strikes during harvest. Because farm workers' number 1 power on the farm is if they go on strike when their labor is most needed. So what kind of law did the growers want? A law that gives farm workers no leverage or takes away the leverage. So So that was one of their hell no's. The next one is a hell no that they would never accept what's called a wall-to-wall bargaining unit. Does anybody know what that is? Ever heard of that? Wall-to-wall bargaining unit basically means everybody except supervisors are in the same bargaining unit. Not these guys versus those guys, right? It's a common tactic to say, well, the nurses are in one bargaining unit and the nurses' assistants are another bargaining unit, or the seasonal workers and the steady workers, or the workers in the Christmas trees and the workers in the strawberries, when really, when you analyze it, 99% of their issues are all the same. Just, they want protection from being fired unjustly, wages, benefits, etc., right? Being treated with dignity. Those are things that everybody deals with. So, one bargaining unit, which by the way, is the law in California. One bargaining unit. It also makes the process easier, and it's about the next hell no, the sixth one, which is no to a mandatory 7-day election. Now, the way representation works in the National Labor Relations Act, it takes at least 7 weeks to get an election from when you file to request one, to say, do the workers on this at this company want to have a union or not. In California, the law is 7 days, 7 calendar days, not 7 business days. 7 calendar days, no exceptions. And if you're on strike, it's 3 days. So, growers said, hell no, we will never accept a 7-day mandatory election. And we'll never accept what's called card check. Does anybody know what that is? It's also called majority sign-up. And this is where workers can sign cards in lieu of an election. There's a majority of the workers from that company or farm who have signed cards. The union can be recognized without need of a secret ballot election. And one of the reasons for that is secret ballot elections are manipulated a lot of tactics to intimidate workers between the time it's requested and the time it's held, even when it's 7 days. Now, the last hell no is no to mandatory binding contract arbitration, which is a long-winded way of saying, if we voted for a union, if we've signed cards for a union, if we're negotiating for a contract and we never get one, what do we have? What protections do we have? What actually changes on the shop floor or out in the fields? And the answer is not much, because you have nothing enforceable. That's what a collective bargaining agreement does, is it makes those agreements or those provisions enforceable, right? So if you can't get to one because employers stall, all the while saying, well, see, your union's no good. You don't have any protections. You know, you went through all those changes and you still don't have anything. That's what mandatory contract arbitration does. It says after a certain amount of time, if you haven't reached an agreement, we're going to submit it to an arbitrator and the arbitrator decides. It's not the best system in the world, but it gets you to a contract. Now, those are 7 hell no's by my count, and our organizing has overcome 6 of them. So the growers used to say, we'll never talk to Pecun. They talked to Pecun. The growers said, we'll never accept unionization. They themselves proposed a law that allows unionization. A law, collective bargaining law, that's another one. A law that would allow strikes during harvest. A law that has a wall-to-wall bargaining unit. A law that allows a 7-day election. That very law they proposed in 2003, but it wasn't good enough because it didn't have mandatory binding contract arbitration. And that is where we stand today, at that point in the political struggle. So in the context of collective bargaining, we have one more hell no to overcome. So if you want,
This is all Oregon, right?
this is all Oregon, right?
Okay.
This is all about Oregon. So those are 2 documents that we'll pass around. So I'm going to stop there, and there's lots more to say obviously about that struggle, and there's a lot more to say about our movement more broadly, but I want to sort of hand it over to Abel and talk about his experiences out there on the doorstep and labor camp and talking directly to workers, and what that. So, ¿cómo estamos? You know, a ver cómo estamos ahí. How are we doing out there?
So first, I want to introduce myself for the concept of why am I worried for the agriculture struggle, for the farm workers struggle. So when you briefly describe what you picture when you hear the word farm workers, I have a totally different definition. Because my people came from the campo. My mom's, not all my family, from my mother's side are farm workers in Mexico, or used to be farm workers. And my understanding of the farm worker is something, it's a very sustainable, simple way of living. That's my brief explanation. Because I don't relate farm worker to poverty, of my understanding before. It was beautiful, simple life, where everything was a collective struggle. It was, the sense of community was there at all given times. Whatever you work for, it was not for you or your family, but it was for you, your family, and others around yourself. So when I got here in the States and I understand what the farm worker struggle was, I was in automatically. Because what you see here and what you see in Mexico and the community my people came from, it's a totally different explanation of farm worker. Here, I don't describe people as farm workers, but as agriculture labor workers. This is just the power. It's just like another machine. It's doing a specific job. So once I realized this in my young mind, I was in for the struggle of the farm workers. Because I want to be able to, the people here have the same pride of being farm workers and not being oppressed as a machine. So when I started organizing, it was through the Dream Act. And I didn't call that organizing at all. I was just doing something that felt right for me. And they sent me to Medford. This is Eastern Oregon.
No, it's through
What's the
Boardman.
Medford?
You mean to 3 Mile Canyon?
Yeah,
The
in
Boardman.
Wallatu is Washington and East Oregon.
Right.
So at this point, and I'm probably can explain it better, but at this point they have won the contract. The workers have won some sort of contract. And before I took off from Pecun, Ramon, the president of Pecun, I remember the last words before I left was like, "Hey, people's gonna be afraid, but be cool." And it didn't connect to my mind, right? I was like, whatever. And Larry said the same advice to me on the same day. I was like, well, people's gonna be afraid, but I think it's gonna be a cool experience. So we got there, me and another compañero, Mario. And in our minds, people have won the contract or won something collectively. But we were knocking on people's door to make sure that we have their support as a union. And people was really rejecting. It was like, no, if it's the union, we don't wanna know. No, like you guys are bad, you're trying to get my job and you're trying to take my money. So it was shocking for me that me and Mario were fighting for something for them. Oh yeah, for them, not even for us at this given moment. And they were seeing us as a threat to them. Like if we were trying to harm or take their jobs. And that made me realize of a lot of things at that moment. But what I saw was Pecun 20 years before. Because there's horrible living conditions, housing is a big problem. You see the segregation in the community. The Mexicans, the farm workers live in one side of the town, and obviously it's the most poor side of town. In fact, some of the water that these people live around is poisoned by some sort of chemical. So it took me, without a time machine, it took me back on time. And I understand how Pecun was before I was there. So once I got back to Pecun, I could realize where we can go even far and how we can impact in other communities. So yeah, that's some of the experience I have. I'm sure I'm leaving some behind, yeah.
So that's a little sketch of what it's like engaging the kind of conditions that we find around us. That experience was in Boardman, in north central Oregon, but there are conditions just like it a few miles from Pecun's office in Woodburn. We want to pull back from that kind of close-up and talk briefly about the broader movement that we've brought to life and brought together, and then we want to show you a 5-minute video slideshow that gives you some more of a feel for what that has come to be. So the third document that I have here that I'll pass around is called the Pecun Movement Model. And in one page we try to sum up how we combine services, community organizing, and campaigns for institutional change. We've come to believe that, and seen by example of others, especially United Farm Workers, that you need a broad base, both in the community and of allies, if you're going to make change, and you're going to keep the change you win. And developing that broad base and redeveloping it, reviving it, is a constant form. It has constant forms of work to it. It's not simply embodied in marches or picket lines. It's in things that people need every day, that they define. And so on the back of this, so this describes that, and on the back of it there's 12 ideas. And we've come to articulate these 12 ideas. They're not the only 12 ideas, but they're 12 important ideas that we've navigated by, whether we realized it or not. Ideas like, take the long view. Ideas like, that amid the instability of the immigrant world, we need to build stability. So that's one of the things we've done by being in the same location. Our union headquarters has been in that location for 32 years. We have a radio station now that we started 6 years ago with Sandy's help, in fact. Sandy's one of the madrinas, as we like to call them, the padrinos and the madrinas of our radio station, Radio Movimiento. Now, well, how is that building stability? The idea is that in our listening area anyway, if something's happening and you want to know what information is reliable, you want to know what's going on, you want to hear about it in depth, you know exactly where to tune. And we're there 24/7. Now, we might not have the exact program on that you want to hear when you tune in, but stay tuned and you'll hear it. You know, if it's going on and it's important in the community, we'll be talking about it. And it's a little bit like KBOO. We have 40 volunteer programmers. It's a little unlike KBOO in that it's more homogeneous. It's all it's in Spanish and a little bit of indigenous languages. It's predominant. It's overwhelmingly Latino. So whereas KBOO is many different languages and ethnic groups, but it has that same volunteer and sort of non-professional culture to it. And as I said before, another one of the big ideas that we have to strive not just to attain but to retain, that we have to build and defend what we've built. And we actually work not just to resist, but we work to be able to prepare ourselves to govern, because we expect to win. Even if we win on a small scale, we then have to govern what we have. And how are we going to do that? And so that's one of our big ideas. So you can look at those big ideas and think about how they fit in the work that you might do. So over time, we've not just started one organization, we've actually started or brought together now 10 organizations. That's too many to describe, although you'll see a little bit of them in this video. But there's a nice handy list with one paragraph about each of them. So if you want to know who our family is, here's our family. Well, it's not quite a family tree, huh? We should do that, huh? We tried that, didn't we? But anyway, that's another document. Stay tuned for that one. And all of these are associated with PECUN, or PECUN had a hand in forming, or actually sprung out of PECUN. And they do a lot of different things: housing, youth leadership, services, immigration services that PECUN itself offers, PECUN's radio, immigrant rights, women's leadership, religious solidarity with our movement. Each of these organizations has their own sort of focus and set of programs. Some are small and some are big.
Did you hear Democracy Now! Today, just the recent Democracy Now!
I didn't hear it today.
Anastasio Hernandez Roja, the guy that 20-some police officers, you heard it.
Yeah, 2 years ago. This is 2 years ago, and he's buried people. And it's pretty bad.
Disgusting. If you can have any hand in helping people, you need that help.
Where did this happen?
And the border in San Diego and PJ. Between border and the lot on this side of San Diego. And over there.
You do some work with helping people out in that way.
We do that. So an organization in our network that would probably take the lead in that is CAUSA, which is the Immigrant Rights Coalition in the state of Oregon.
Thank you.
And the newest organization is called the Capaces Leadership Institute. And Capaces is an acronym, but it's also a Spanish word that means we are capable. And the story of that, or the thumbnail of that, is on this page, and on the back is a description of the building that the Capaces Leadership Institute is building right now. And I think that's the cue to show our slideshow.
So before I introduce this,
Should we turn the
imagine,
light on?
yeah, we can do it in a minute. So
I guess
imagine
it's-
when Pecun started 25 or 30 years ago, they started with less than nothing. How is less than nothing? People before Pecun came, tried to organize, but they didn't succeed. So when people, like when Pecun came, tried to organize, people didn't trust the organizing more. They were like, seeing that, doing that, it doesn't work, it doesn't affect us. So if you forward 25 years, is it 25 years now?
Yes, 27 years,
20
next week.
27 years and see what we have accomplished. It's not nothing, but it's a lot more than nothing, than less than nothing. So this explains what we have accomplished in those 25 years and explains a little bit of what we're trying to accomplish next.
What is Capaces? An idea? A dream? Today, it is a reality. We are Capaces.
Oops.
Advising social change, leadership development, and community engagement in many and different ways. Serving and organizing working people in Oregon.
What is Capaces about, and who are the participating organizations? We are Pecun, Causa, Voz Hispana, Causa Chavista, Mujeres Luchadoras Progresistas, Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality, Latinos Unidos Siempre, Mano a Mano Family Center, and the Farm Worker Housing Development Corporation. We work with low-income immigrant Latinos. We work together to strive for better living conditions, for political participation, for economic fairness, and a stronger social consciousness.
Le cantaré a las estrellas lo que iba a cantarte a ti. No quisiste oír mis penas, ay, pobrecito de mí. Bendito es aquel que ama y no te conoce a ti. Y no te conoce a ti. Ay, la la la. Ay, la la la. Y no te conoce a ti.
What is the Capaces Leadership Institute? It is the beginning of a long journey for all of us. It is the place where we can grow. It is the space to discover our own selves, those around us and our future generations. It's a building that is uniting the green building movement and the social justice movement. The Institute will reside in a green building and have a fighting soul for human rights. How are we building community? Working shoulder to shoulder, sharing our ideas, custom, values, and our experiences. How do we strengthen trust in each other? We do it by sharing who we are, where we come from, where we're going, what we believe, and how we respect each other.
Cabassas Leadership Institute going to contribute to a better community and a better world? Cultivating the leadership in new generations, raising political consciousness, understanding the big ideas that glue our movement, and acquiring the skills to put them to use, serving the people.
Ay, la, la, la. Ay, la, la, la. Qué pena tan grande.
Thank you.
So that's that building you saw sort of rising up in a few images there is I was just thinking about this the other day, that the vision that we had for that work, the work of engaging the leaders we are in our movement today and those that emerge around those big ideas I mentioned, the values, and equipping them with the skills to put them to use, is a vision we decided to move forward on 12 years ago, and we actually started doing 4 years ago. The building's taken us a while. It's almost done. It's probably 80% done as we're sitting here. That last slide you saw is how it looks now. It'll be all done by the 1st of July, and we'll have our grand opening on August 25th. And you're all invited to come join us then.
Where is it located?
So it's located in Woodburn on Young Street, a couple of blocks from the tracks, right next to downtown. So what I want to do is hand out these documents before I forget. So I'm going to send them around kind of one at a time. Take one if you like. Obviously no obligation. It may be more information than you bargained for, but it's also a resource we find that when you go and when you talk to somebody else and say, well, so who are these people and what do they do? These documents might be able to explain it more cogently than you find yourself recalling, especially since we didn't go into a lot of detail. So that's enough from us for right now. What we want to do is hear from you about what you want to know, what in the whole wide world that por eso estamos como estamos, or how are we doing now, would you like to hear more about or tell us more about?
Did that affect you very much in Arkansas when they tried to make laws against the immigrant people coming in and picking for their farms, people coming from Mexico, and then when no one came and their crops failed? Was that of much effect on you?
So I think you're talking about Alabama?
Alabama.
Not
yeah,
Arkansas.
Okay. Alabama, yeah, that's it.
Well, it didn't affect, I don't think it's affected us very directly because the community in Alabama is pretty small. It's about 100,000 people. And there's not a whole lot of interaction between the Mexican community in Oregon and in Alabama. There's some ties. Obviously, politically, it's a huge thing. And in fact, tomorrow, the Supreme Court will be hearing arguments on the Arizona law, SB 1070, on which the Alabama law was patterned. In fact, Alabama's law is a worse version of that. But I actually had the occasion and the privilege of going to Alabama in the beginning of March for the reenactment of the Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery. And this is something, the original march, of course, was in 1965. And every few years, African American community, principally, comes together and reenacts the march. And they cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right out, coming out of Selma, and they walk along the highway there, Route 80, 54 miles to the state capitol. It takes them 6 days. And they have stopping points along the way. It's now a national scenic route and with protected exhibits and what all. There's a visitor center along the way. But this year's reenactment had special significance because of the struggle about that Alabama law, HB 56. So on Sunday, March 7th, I believe it was. No, it was March 5th. I and my partner Leslie went to Montgomery and got there in time to hear some of the speeches of national civil rights leaders and local leaders before the march kicked off. There were probably 2,000 people. I would say 80% of them African Americans, mostly from right there, and a number of Latino immigrant families, mainly from northern Alabama. And I got a chance to hear Representative John Lewis, who's a congressman from Atlanta. John Lewis has been a champion for immigrant rights for many years. And what he said on the steps of that church before we all stepped off into the street and started marching toward the Edmund Pettus Bridge was, today, he said, I and other African American leaders put this historic commemoration and all that it represents in the service of the immigrant rights struggle. And it was one of the greatest expressions of generosity and of solidarity that I've heard in many, many years. Now, chances are a number of folks in the crowd don't really know very much about that struggle. Maybe they don't know Latinos. Latinos are relatively new arrivals in Alabama compared to African Americans or white folks. But it set a tone, and that was set uniformly by other leaders that were there: Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Elizabeth Baker Holt, who's vice president of the AFL-CIO, and a number of other, Eliseo Medina, secretary treasurer of SEIU, and others. Dolores Huerta was there later during the march. But it set a very powerful tone about the idea that what used to be called Jim Crow is now called Juan Crow. It's a new form. It's not lynchings. It's not signs on bathrooms, but it is just as pernicious and it is just as violative of human rights. And that was the message from the African American leaders. And so that reenactment, which then proceeded over the subsequent 6 days, was dedicated to that solidarity and ended with about 5,000 people on the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery demanding repeal of HB 56. And a repeal bill is before the Alabama legislature now. There's also a bill to change it that's being promoted by the governor, not to repeal it, just to change it, to sort of smooth off some of the awfully sharp edges. And one of the reasons for that is that when a German auto executive from Daimler was visiting Alabama and their big plant in Birmingham, he was arrested for not having his papers, not being able to produce his papers. When another visiting executive from Japan visiting the Honda plant, same thing happened. So it's a little embarrassing for Governor Bentley and his friends to be defending this law as good for business. And as you said, the tomato growers, the cattle ranchers, especially in the northeastern part of the state, are facing complete ruin because they have no workers.
Thank you.
And here it says, community organizing engages powerful institutions directly, but usually in an ad hoc way that tends not to, could you give us examples, tends not to target the most fundamental power dynamics? Could you give us some examples over time, tactics that you've used?
Well, I think the tactics are often not that different, but you could say the demands or the goals tend to be more limited. So recently, 2 new schools were built in the city of Salem, one in Northeast Salem and one in South Salem. And the question, as always happens with new schools, is what are we going to call them? Who or what are we going to name these schools for? And the community mobilized, especially in the northeast area of Salem, which is has the greatest concentration of Latinos and immigrants, and requested that the school be named for Cesar Chavez. Naming a school for somebody, even somebody as important and well known as Cesar, is not going to change institutional oppression. But it is an important step, both for the community to learn how to organize, to be a part of organizing, to see their power, and to gain a form of recognition. So that's an example of community organizing that, in our opinion, doesn't necessarily, that isn't on a scale with institutional change like collective bargaining is, that actually changes the power dynamics permanently in the workplace. But it is an important stepping stone and contributes to that movement building.
So looking back 27 years, the tactics at that time were much more direct, or?
Well, I think we have a greater variety of tactics now because we have more resources now. We have more support. We have we're more widely known than we were. But many of the tactics we use are the tactics that have been used, that Gandhi used, that movements over time have used. We are a nonviolent movement, and so we don't use the tactic of violence. We understand violence, and we understand people's reactions to react violently to violence, but that is not a tenet of our movement. But litigation, consumer organizing, workplace organizing, and on, petitioning, letter writing, lobbying, are all tactics we've used in combination. In some cases, others depending on the circumstances. And so I would say that our tactics have been more richly mixed together over the years as we've had more options and more resources to mix them together. One thing I want to mention really quickly is that one of the sort of original forces behind getting our movement going was the National Lawyers Guild. In fact, I was a member of the National Lawyers Guild, a new member, when I started doing this work 35 years ago. And it was the alliance of progressive workers, legal workers, lawyers, law students, and people in the Chicano community that started the fight against INS, the Immigration Service. Now, obviously, the fight has gone way beyond that particular, even though that's still an iconic struggle and one we're very active in, both on the lobbying, on advocacy, litigation, individual service. But it also created sort of deep bonds with the progressive legal community. So when people would try to intimidate us by threatening to sue us, we knew that we had kick-ass lawyers who would represent us for free because they believed in our cause and they knew us to be serious. And that, I'm sure, gave pause to some of our adversaries over time, thinking twice about, is that something you really want to take on? And so that's an example of a tactic that maybe hasn't changed the landscape, but it's kept us moving forward.
So I'm really interested in the staying power of this movement, especially because it was such a high mountain that you needed to climb. And it seems to me so often, especially in union work, I was on a union bargaining team once, and the people across the table were getting paid to be there. And we were all volunteers. So they didn't care how long they kept us there. They didn't care how much time we wasted. And I found that very discouraging. I found it very hard to stick with that. And I only did it for one. I mean, I stayed with it until we got our contract, but I didn't volunteer the next time. And I'm very interested in how your organization and you manage to not get overwhelmed, to not get discouraged, and hang in there.
We're not successful, first of all. But, so I'm going to give you the example that I use. So when I was in high school and I started organizing, probably in 07, Ramon Constantly, the president of the union, say once in a meeting that this work is a sacrifice. It's not a privilege. It's not even fun at one point. It's a sacrifice. And he explained that he as a person has sacrificed a lot of time given to the struggle and not to his family. A lot of connections, a lot of families, a lot of friends. And I think that I see it the same way. Now it's a sacrifice. And if it means that I'm going to stay and I'm going to pay less, that I'm the work that I'm doing, and I'm gonna struggle with myself, with my friends, it is still a sacrifice. And I think that if out of the beginning we understand that it's gonna be a sacrifice of our lives, of our time, this work, because of the cost, it's a good cost, is gonna give us the fuel. Again, like Larry mentioned at the one of the big ideas, the 12 ideas, take the long view, understanding that we're not gonna change everything we want in our lifetimes, but that we're gonna get closer, is the point. But understanding that we're gonna sacrifice more than we're ever gonna get back. But we're actually gonna get it back, because it's I think the understanding that you're being part of something beautiful, something bigger than yourself, it's for me at least, it's paid. And that all the sacrifice that we and all my compañeros at work give, it's meaningful.
And I feel exactly the same way as Abel. And one of the things that I relate to about Abel, from my own history is, I met Abel when he was a few days before he led 1,000 students walking out of his high school. And it reminded me, this was 2006, and it reminded me of the time when I led 1,200 of my classmates, along with others, walking out of my high school when I was a junior in high school in 1970. The cause at that time was stopping the Vietnam War. And Kent State and Jackson State had just happened. Students had been killed by National Guard in Mississippi and Ohio. And we felt called to act. So I think, the way I would phrase the answer for myself, that Abel, or the sentiment that he described, is that a struggle, however difficult it is, if it's about dignity, has a powerful force behind it. And I think when people struggle for their dignity, whether they win their battles or not, they've defended their dignity and they come out stronger. And that's a lot, I think, of what being a human being is all about. So I like to say, and I've been, has heard this too many times, I'm sure, that every day in the struggle, in these 35 years that I've spent in the struggle, starting when I was 23 years old, I have two feelings every day, and I have these more frequently as I've gotten older. One set of feelings falls into the category, I can't believe we have all this. So every time I walk into that farm worker housing that our sister organization has built over the last 20 years, 236 units of farm worker housing in 3 cities. And I walk into the Cipriano Ferrer Education Center, the multi-purpose education center on the campus of Nuevo Amanecer, which has 90 units, soon to have another 40 that we're going to build starting this summer, and it'll be finished next year. And we have this beautiful multi-purpose center that we built in 2002 and 2003, and it's named for one of our co-founders, Cipriano Ferrer, who grew up with Caesar's family in Delano, came to Oregon in 1975. He and I started working together in 1976, and along with Ramon in 77. Cipriano died at the age of 45 in 1995 of a heart attack. He was a powerful spirit for us, a connection to the United Farm Worker Movement in a very personal way. Every time I walk into that multi-purpose center that's called the Cipriano Ferrer Education Center, I think to myself, we started with less than nothing. We started, a few of us, and talked to people, and they said, oh yeah, that's what those other guys said, and where are they? So we had to start out proving ourselves for something that we didn't even fail at before we had a chance to fail. To go from that to having our own center that we raised all the money for, that we own, and is named for one of our heroes, that I have that feeling, I can't believe this is all, I can't believe we have all this. But then something else happens in that same day, and I think, I can't believe this is all we have. I can't believe we've been struggling this hard all these years, and we're still dealing with this bullshit, or that petty grievance, or this problem where so-and-so can't get along with so-and-so, or the lack of some basic capacity that we need to sustain a struggle, or that it's been 20 years And we've only built 235 or 236 units of farm worker housing, when the need is 100 times that, right? I can't believe this is all we have. So I have both of those feelings every day. And what I've learned as a leader is the art of leading is being able to balance those two feelings and not give in to one or expect one to offset or resolve the other. They both exist. And so what I get to do that is most fulfilling to me in the big picture, and I can't believe I have all this, is that I get to act on every day the things I most deeply believe and have something meaningful come of it, even if it's small. And I get to do that in one way or another, if not every day, every week. I'll settle for once a week even, right? And I don't think in human experience, I don't think there are very many circumstances where you can say that that's what you have. And that's what's worth all the sacrifice, in my opinion, is being able to act on my values and see something come of it and feel fulfilled.
Obviously, the immigrant struggle would be intricately connected with the American agricultural system. How connected are either of you personally or the movement as a whole to the food justice efforts, either here locally or nationally?
Well, we're really deeply involved in. First of all, it's a very diverse set of groups and strategies, and we are plugged into a number of them. There's different sort of formations that have developed, working from a variety of angles, all I think in a good direction, trying to figure out what are the ways to have a comprehensive vision of sustainability that actually works in practice. And one thing we find is it's both a political struggle and a practical struggle. The political struggle is, do we agree with what is in the realm of sustainability? And what we see often in some circles that talk about sustainability is they're worried about the earth, and they're worried about the crops, they're worried about the economy of the farmer, and they have no appreciation for the daily security of the worker, especially the worker's immigration status. The corrosive psychological and practical effect on people of not having a driver's license is substantial, and that's not on the radar of what's considered by many a form of sustainability. So part of our job, I think, is to inject that notion into a broader vision of sustainability that we hold. The practical side is, even once we get agreement on those political principles of what is going to be, how are we going to measure ourselves here, or our collective effort as being sustainable, then getting that to align in a practical way so that products are produced in a sustainable way and brought to market for people to have access to them. And that, we found, sometimes is almost as difficult as the political struggle. So we maybe make a breakthrough on the political struggle and then find that we really can't figure out how to get enough of the right players, if you will, in that progression engaged to actually make a chain of sustainable production and consumption. And so that's one thing we're working on a big scale, actually, nationally, as well as locally, to try to figure out how to conduct that political struggle in a constructive way, as constructive as we can, without compromising our principles, but also make it give it practical effect.
What's the relationship with the new sanctuary movement? I notice it's not on this list because at the agriculture.
Well, again, the entity in our network that works most closely with them, and in particular in Portland, is CAUSA. So on the issue of secure communities, which is about the cooperation between ICE and local police, New Sanctuary Movement is involved in that. National Lawyers Guild, American Friends Service Committee, Jobs of Justice, a number of us, and CAUSA. So that's sort of our most direct engagement with them.
Question, I suppose. worst offenders in Oregon for the ideals you try to uphold?
Who are the worst offenders?
It's the Grinch of the year.
Right, huh? Well, the thing that gives me pause about that question is I have to take account of what are all the offenses. Because there's a lot of them. And so that to me is a big part of determining if I were to try to who is the worst offender.
Well, I noticed the slideshow had a reference to boycotting Flavor Pack, for example. Are they still particularly bad about X, Y, or Z, or what does that look like?
Well, that was the boycott against NORPAC that we waged from 19. That's one of their brands, the brand of their frozen fruits and vegetables. The boycott against NORPAC was iconic because NORPAC is the biggest entity that's owned and operated by the growers themselves. So they're individual growers. There are 240, I believe, growers who are member owners of that processing company. And it started out as a little cooperative, like we would think of a cooperative, but it has become a massive conglomerate, and has actually bought up facilities that used to be owned by multinational corporations like Birdseye. So it's kind of going the other way, and they import produce from Mexico and other places. They don't just pack what they grow here locally. So it's gotten beyond the notion of a sort of a traditional co-op. But back to your question, I don't think that they're not the best and they're not the worst. But in making institutional change, you have to engage the institutions that hold the power, because they set the pace for everybody else. So in banking, for example, you might say, well, we're going after this bank. They certainly need to clean up their act. They may not be the worst as some other bank, but they hold the power. They set the pace in banking. And we can go after this small bank over here and redress their wrongs, but if they have no ability to sustain in the marketplace, that will be a Pyrrhic victory. An important victory, but a Pyrrhic one, because they won't survive. And so that's one of the conundrums of organizing that Occupy, in fact, has had to ponder, which is, Occupy may, and righteously so, confront injustice wherever it's found, but over time, I think, at least my understanding of history tells me that we need strategies if we're going to build on what we do, and not simply do things that have immediate effects and then start over. We have to do better than that because we don't have enough power to afford not to. And so sometimes we end up confronting people and entities who are not the worst, who are not doing the worst thing in the moment, right? You could go out and find somebody else that is. But if we're ever going to change the standard for everybody, we're going to have to go after the people that hold the power.
And I would assume also you might choose to target an entity because it's winnable. It's a winnable fight, and that would help garner support and generate more enthusiasm for continuing the struggle, even if it's not the most powerful target.
Well, that's again about taking the long view.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't. If we lose every battle and hope to win the war, as it were, to use that metaphor, well, that not very many struggles actually resemble that. So, and we see this in the immigrant rights movement. We've fought a lot of battles and fended off a lot of bad legislation in this state, but we have not won what we came for, which was a path to citizenship for undocumented families, undocumented workers. Like the ups and downs of the DREAM Act that you were talking about, and where we are today, with Marco Rubio talking about it.
The reason that I got involved was because of the DREAM Act. And look at me, how many years is it? 6, 7 years now, and we're in the same place. If is now worse. Because now we're battling between each other.
Did you hear, again, it was on Amy Goodman this morning, that in Arizona, the Indian tribes have opened a university to allow immigrants to go to college, non-documented immigrants, because it's not the United States. Right? I mean, this is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant as a way of getting around the law. I have a question.
And by the way, any private institution can do that.
Yeah.
So it's great that they did that as a sovereign government.
Yes, it's
But
sovereign
any,
government, yeah.
Harvard can do that, and in fact has done it.
Yes.
Not very
Oh,
often.
they have?
but
Oh,
absolutely.
okay.
Not very often, with a few selected cases, but they
Um,
absolutely have.
But while, I actually teach a class on protest politics and know very little about it, but that's the way the academics are. And as I'm listening to you and thinking this is a 20-year struggle, and comparing it, for example, with Occupy, this is going to take a while. Francis Fox Piven makes an argument that confrontation has to be direct, and it has to be that you have to sort of confront power in a way that discombobulates it, so it doesn't actually you're taking something away, you're withdrawing your support as a consumer, you're whatever it is that's just going to disrupt the whole system. But it has to be dramatic and instant, and then when you organize, things start to dissipate, because that's one of her perspectives. Yet, what I hear from you is that organization is really your strength over the long haul. That it is the continual pecking away at the system that you see as being really one of the strengths of your movement.
But there's another side, I think it is, but there's another side to that, which is it's what we're building also. We're building stuff that is functioning, and is functioning within the system as we know it. We don't, a good example is the housing. We don't make most of the rules that govern who lives in that housing. Our funders do, sad to say. The folks who lend us the money, the government. But we make some of the rules. And then the question is, how do we apply those rules? And who is involved in that process? Which I contend is a test of how we govern, even if we only govern in some limited way. And I think if we're not preparing ourselves to govern, then we're not likely to compellingly hold over the long view the kind of vision we need to actually sustain our movement. And movements, insurrections happen all the time through history, and will continue to happen, and need to happen. And so it's not, even if you come away thinking that building organization is our claim to fame, I think you would see if you read the 12 Ideas that resistance and battling for justice and being confrontational is very much a part of it as well. And then it becomes a balance of when is that called for and when is it not called for. And it's not necessarily a neat formula either. And we make miscalculations about it all the time. But we have come away believing that insurrection isn't enough and resistance is not enough.
So now that you've done a lot of talking, I don't know if you're going to get there, but what are some practical ways of helping your organization or helping the movement from here in Portland? Or are there ways of just connecting with these organizations and seeing where we can plug in?
I think the organization of ours that's most active in Portland is CAUSA. They have an office over in the left bank, that little annex there by the
Coliseum.
By the Rose
right,
Garden.
right. They're organizing to win restoration of driver's license privilege, a mass struggle, again, thinking of a mass struggle in a moment. There was a legislative hearing that happened on it in the 2011 session. That was an evening hearing and 2,000 people came. which was not a record, by the way. The record was in 2008, when they were taking away driver's license, 6,000 people came and overwhelmed the Capitol. And yet, we don't have driver's license restored. And we think it's absolutely inhumane and idiotic to have a law that says we should have fewer licensed drivers on the road. That's a good thing for our society. So never mind the human rights, never mind the immigration status. As a matter of public safety, if we know that people with necessity will drive, I don't know about you, but I want them to be licensed. Right? That's what I'd like. I think I would feel safer. And they would like to be licensed. But because we have this law, thanks to the Real ID Act passed in 2005, and other forces, so that's going to be a big struggle in 2013. And CAUSA, along with PECUNA, are going to lead that struggle to try to restore driver's license, access to driver's license, regardless of immigration status. So that's a struggle to plug into. And if you go to CAUSAOregon.org, that's their website, sign up to get email alerts. That'll tell you about activities. May 1st, we'll be at the Capitol again, just like 2006, when there were 12,000 people there, along with, including 1,000 students from north, right? From all over the high schools of Salem, thank you. And there won't probably be 12,000 people there this year. This year we're going to do it in the evening, something we've never tried before. So it's going to be a rally at 6 and a march at 7. But every year on May 1st, we've been at the Capitol since starting in 2006. Now there's usually a march in Portland also, but I think the march in Portland is during the day, so you can go to that march and you can come down to Salem and start to see it for yourself.
So, as you were talking about this driver's license thing, it made me think about the fact that a big part of the struggle is who your allies are. Getting masses of people to agree with you, which means changing hearts and minds. And I wondered if that's something you put a lot of energy into. I mean, I hear you talking about confronting the power. I've heard you mention allies, but I haven't heard you a lot talk about, changing the general public's attitude, say, towards immigrants. I have friends who work in the gay marriage movement. And I know right now in Oregon, that's their biggest strategy. They're not going into ballot right now. They want to change the public's opinion. And I wonder if that is certainly when you did the boycott, that was important to have the public's support. Is this something? I mean, it's very easy for those of us who aren't immigrants to not think about the fact. The driver's license issue, for instance.
Changing hearts and minds, what would you say about that?
I think that I don't know, at least in myself as a person, it's an everyday thing. Every day that I wake up, that's one of my goals. But how do you do it? It's a lot more difficult. Just imagine, if you're not an immigrant, what do you have in common with an immigrant? Imagine you go to an event, concert, a book reading, and it's full of people that doesn't look like you. How do you start an interaction? How? For yourself. I can tell you how I do it myself. I just throw myself in. I'm authentic of who I am and where I came from. But that highlights two things, at least, that is on the top of my head. One is racism. Racism that people's part of without noticing, and that highlights the guilt. People feel guilty of racism or racist actions that they're doing unconsciously. And how do you deal with that? I don't know, because I have never felt that before in my life, and I don't know if I ever feel this. But it's sort of a work in progress. You have to meet in the middle, but it starts with you as a person. You have to reach and understand that I'm different, but I have something in common with another person. What it is, I'm not sure. Finding that is what you're talking about. Reaching into people and understand that we're different, we come from different places, but we have something in common. At least everybody here has something in common. We all have passion for fight for injustice. Out of the gate. We have that in common. It doesn't matter where you came from, the year you were born, neither do mine. Because at the end of our lives, that's what we want to accomplish. But it starts in you as a person, as an individual. Reaching out, being uncomfortable, feeling comfortable, being uncomfortable around people. Learning other cultures, learning other names, other traditions, accepting, embracing those. Create your own community and be part of that community.
That's the way it happens, no matter how big or small, how it came to be, that's exactly how it happens. And that is, and think about same-sex marriage as a great example. How many years ago, I mean, I can't believe, this is one thing, I can't believe we have all this. I never thought in my lifetime that we would be where we are today. Never. If you'd asked me, I don't know, 15 years ago, I would have said, nope. I mean, I hope to live a long time, but I would have said, not in my lifetime. And it's because we reached a tipping point somewhere along the way, right? Now, we could probably analyze what those things were, and we should, actually, to understand. So a lot of, so you ask about what we do to change hearts and minds, and like Abed says, we do it every day individually. We do it on a mass scale. You know, we could have built that building. We could have raised a bunch of money, which we did, and hired somebody to build the building. We could have done that, and we decided to do it the long way. We decided to build the building in a movement-building way. So there have been 1,000 people that have worked on that building. Some of them, all they did was take a shovel and shovel gravel from here to there. Others of them did incredibly iconic things. Just last Saturday, people came and planted plants on the living roof. Right? They got up on the roof and they planted little plants that are going to live up there. Right? Now, I'll bet you, in fact, some of them were from the Staples company. They worked for Staples. And some had probably never been to Woodburn and didn't know about farm workers. But they're going to remember. That's a pretty unusual experience, to go plant a roof. You know, maybe it'll become commonplace, I don't know. But it isn't yet, so even if it becomes commonplace, they'll always remember that that was the first roof they planted. And then they'll be fulfilling what I consider to be one of the quality that makes the Capaces Leadership Institute building exactly an exercise in changing hearts and minds that you just asked about, Sandy, which is what I call the Tres Maravillas. The three marvels, or the three wonders. This building will be known as having three wonders about it. One is the building itself and its design. It's the first passive house building for commercial or office, probably in the country, certainly in the West. And it's not in the Pearl, right? It's in Woodburn, in the barrio, in an urban renewal district, for God's sake. Built, and then the second wonder is how the building was built. It wasn't built by a person with more money than God. It was built by poor workers and their allies, right? And the third marvel is what happens inside the building. Now, right now, all that's happening inside the building is building, but that phase will, over time, pale in terms of its length compared to the life of the building. And what goes on in there. So all of the engagement about these big ideas that we're talking about, the very kind of conversation we're having right now, will happen in that building. And it'll happen often in various ways. And it'll happen with people who have never had a conversation like that before. High school students, people learning Puruepecha, which is a language from Michoacan. People who come from far away to learn what it is we do in this movement. And so every time people arrive attracted by one of those three wonders, they'll discover the other two. So when architecture students come from the U of O, because they heard that this is a really amazing building with its living roof and its triple pane windows and its heating and cooling system where you can heat the building with your own hot air, right? That's how airtight the building is. They're going to come and have no idea about what goes on inside this building. And they're going to learn something about who's in Woodburn, what is this movement, why did you build this building, right? And vice versa. when people from the community come, because they have been invited to participate in a class or a discussion, but have no idea what this building is. They just sort of see it as they drive by. And maybe they heard that some of their relatives helped build it, or, yeah, it didn't used to be there, and there it is. But they really don't know the story about that. They really don't know anything about green building, right? They don't know anything about Latino participation in green building. And there's an entree to do that. And that, Sandy, is how you change hearts and minds, in my experience. And one of the iconic alliances we've built over the last 20 years is with the LGBT community. And it started with the Walk for Love and Justice in 1992, when people walked from Eugene to Portland. And they walked down, basically down 99E the whole way. And they told us later that we were the only folks that actually welcomed them to the place that they were going to stay. In our case, it was our Union Hall, right? Some of the places they stayed in, places like Junction City and other little towns along the way, basic, supportive people, gave them a key and said, here, just put it under the mat when you leave, and kind of like try to keep it down, right? Because we're not entirely comfortable in the community here that you come, and that wasn't the reception that they got when they came to Woodland. Now, needless to say, homophobia is a big problem. It's a big problem in Oregon. It's a big problem in the Latino community. It's a big barrier. But Pecuna has put itself out, just like John Lewis did, and said, our struggle is in the surface of that struggle, because that's a righteous struggle. Even if others may look at us as being less or illegitimate as a result of taking that position. And I think that's built very powerful alliances, and the example of how the LGBT community has changed hearts and minds and has reached a tipping point may be instructive to us as we reach the tipping point about immigrants.
A question, if we were to go down in Woodburn, could we just stop in there and look around or get a little tour, or would you feel comfortable pulling in there? Or is that something you recommend, or?
People do it all the time.
So like I'm traveling down, I said, I should go check that place out, or would I feel kind of not really like, what are you doing here? What do you want? Kind of, because I don't know what I want. I just want to know and learn a little. Is it come on down, you're welcome here?
Well,
kind of a feel?
Being busy as we are, sometimes we're more convenient than others, but. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how many, if you just jump right in, like people's doing multiple things. Everybody's doing something there. But I guess if you plan it ahead, and you let some of our folks know, you will get the best treat. You will get a tour. And and when I say a tour, it takes about 30 to 45 minutes to see all of it. Because it's 3/4 of a block plus the house that we own. So it's not that you go and sort of take a look, and it's a lot, and there's a lot more history when somebody explains you what happened. And like later on me, a lot of people does the radio. I mean, just imagine, it's not a house, it's 3/4 of a block. And it will take a while to take all that.
I travel to Salem once in quite a bit. Every other few months, and I know I go right by Woodburn, and I'm familiar with what's going on there, but I just didn't know if there'd be something to go do. Pull on in, right? Check it out.
Well, it is something to do. It's something that's more practical to do if you let us know you're coming.
Okay.
So
I could see more what's going on and engage a little bit, because otherwise I just hear things and I don't know.
So that 3/4 of a block compound is located 5 minutes from the freeway, about 1.5 miles.
Okay.
And so my cell phone's on that card, and if you let me know you're coming, maybe not on any given day, maybe I'm not in town or whatever, maybe somebody else is, you're always welcome to stop by. Whether somebody can spend some time with you or not, if we don't know you're coming, is a little more of a challenge, but often not. So I'd say give it a shot.
Okay.
And to improve your chances, call ahead, and even if it's just a day or two, and we'll do what we can. And we have the radio station, we have the Union Hall, Risberg Hall, that's another interesting story, and we have the new building right next to it, the Capaces Leadership Institute, which will have its grand opening on August 25th. So you can come down for that. And we hope to have the Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis, as the keynote speaker.
Have
So, I'm just passing around our next program, which is similar to this one in that it's about a successful movement, and dissimilar in that it was not about building something, it was about getting rid of something. It's the Trojan Decommissioning Alliance. Nina Bell is coming, who has been with it from the beginning, and she is still a leader in that movement. She is the head of the Northwest Environmental Northwest Environmental Advocates, and I think she has a great deal to share with us. Are there more questions? Or?